Hello and happy, beautiful day to you. Today I want to talk about the topic of overwhelm because so often I've seen people who get in a state of overwhelm and instead of decreasing it, it can tend to increase or even intensify into frustration or anger or even feeling victim to that feeling of overwhelm and feeling victim to life. And in that place, it can lead to feelings of feeling disempowered or just aggravation and just so much just overwhelm, if you will. And so as we go into this topic, I want to invite you to be willing to open your mind and to think about overwhelm in a different way. Because if you're thinking about it in the same way, of course, you could remain stuck. And I see people do that, unfortunately, all of the time. And it affects their health, their life, their happiness, their love, their relationship. And so the insight that I want to invite you to look at is this, is if you think about who you were when you were in fourth grade or even eighth grade, and you think about what you are capable of now compared to then, you can see that what you're capable of today would overwhelm your first grade self or your fourth grade self or your eighth grade self. And so when we stop and think about it for a moment, that the things that I do today, for example, my high school self would have never been able to do the things that I do. My high school self would have felt overwhelmed by them. And yet I do them on a regular basis. Now, what's my point? My point is that we as human beings, we want to be constantly growing and we want to be able to be at ease with what we're doing. And so if you think about your growth, for example, if you think about what you're capable of today is so much more than you were capable of when you were in high school, if you will. But if we think about what human beings are capable of, I mean, there are people who run companies with 10,000 employees. There are people who are president or whatnot, people who have roles that require a lot of moving parts, or people who have multiple companies, and yet they're still able to function, or people who have, a lot of kids, or even a teacher, a school teacher who manages a class of, 20 children. So if you think about it for a moment, or more children, but if you think about it, what we are capable of as human beings is incredible. And what we're capable of, it keeps growing and growing and growing of what we're able to do if we're continuing to grow. Now, one way to kind of also think about this physically is if you think about our muscles for a moment. Okay, kind of shifting gears to another perspective. If you think about our muscles, how do muscles grow? Well, they don't grow from doing the same thing over and over. They come from, if we overload them a little bit, and we overload them, what happens is our muscles continue to grow and we get stronger. And what we're doing gets easier and easier and easier. So whatever we were lifting, it gets easier. Now, of course, if you overwhelm yourself way too much, then that's not good for your muscles. But if your muscles are a bit overloaded, a little bit, not too much, but a bit heavier or whatnot when you're lifting weights or working out, then what happens is that you grow. Or if you think about endurance training, if you are running a mile, or running 5 miles or practicing for a marathon, what happens? The exact thing is that you work towards the certain amount, then you can do more, then you can do more, then you can do more. So we take on more and more and more as we are growing, as we are expanding our capabilities. Now, when it comes to the mindset, so often the issue is this, is if people start to feel overwhelmed and they get angry, they can actually stop their growth. Because instead of saying, if they get overwhelmed and they can say, okay, yep, I'm feeling a stretch right now. I'm feeling a little bit extra right now. I'm feeling extra right now. Let me grow into this. Let me grow. There's a lot going on. Let me grow into this. That's a healthy way to grow when you're stretching a bit. But if somebody says, oh, I'm feeling too much, this is overwhelming, this is frustrating, and they get aggravated, or they get frustrated, or upset, or victim feeling, they can actually stop their growth. Because that, if we relate it back to the gym, imagine if somebody's going to run a mile, and as soon as they start to run more than a mile, they get upset and angry and frustrated. Well, that's not going to help them. Or if they're lifting and working out and they're lifting weights and they start to lift more than they're used to, and they get really angry and frustrated and upset, that hinders their growth. And so the same is true with our personal growth, what we're capable of. And so often I'll see people do that very thing where they've been stuck, because what happens is if they feel a bit overwhelmed and stretched in life, they can get emotionally reactive. They get frustrated or angry or upset. And then what happens is, instead of helping them to continue to grow, it actually makes it worse. Because imagine somebody's head, if they're already feeling a bit stretched, and then they're frustrated, they go, but he's doing this or she's doing that, or I can't believe. So then their mind is stewing at the same time. It can make it worse. And of course, part of the reason that we're talking about this is because it can also lead to illness, where people then start getting a lot of negative emotions or stress in the mind, which can affect the physical body. And then people will have tendencies to do this, where they feel frustrated or overwhelmed by the family or friends or work or life or kids or whatever it is. And then they stew on it, and it creates a problem. And so that insight. So I want you to think about this for a moment. I want to invite you to look at if this is something that you have done, and maybe it's something you could change so you're not doing that anymore. Now, further, there's another issue that I'm seeing a lot, is I'll see people who are starting to kind of check out when they feel overwhelmed. So if they feel a bit overwhelmed by their day, what do? They check out. They check out. They check out. The problem is of course, it's the same thing. It doesn't allow them to grow. So for example, so if somebody's lifting weights and they start lifting a little bit more weights than they're used to, and instead of getting better at it, they say, I'm going to want to check out. Or if somebody's running the mile and they're working on running more distance, and they feel like they're starting to run more than they used to, and they say, I want to check out. Or if somebody's feeling a bit of overwhelm, a bit of stretch in life, instead of saying, okay, let me navigate this, let me get better at this, how can I arrange this, how can I do this in a way to just continue growing and stretching and get good at this? Instead, people are saying, oh, this is a lot. And then they want to check out. And so all of the time I've seen people who are on, the spiritual or self-help or self-healing journey. And what's happened is they got this habit to where they start to feel a little bit overwhelmed by something. And instead of navigating it and learning it and addressing it and getting good at it, so they're expanding who they are, they start developing habits of just checking out. They go, oh, well, I felt a bit overwhelmed. Let me just go sit out in nature. Let me go. And don't get me wrong. Of course, sitting out in nature can be great, but not as an escape, but as an enjoyment. So if you said, oh, I want to go sit out in nature, fantastic. But as far as life goes, what happens is the more that we get better and better at life and feeling good and creating patterns of feeling, when you feel towards life like you've got this, you can do this, you're amazing, and you feel that, it's good for your health. It's a great pattern for your health. So just like if you think about a first grader who's overwhelmed by first grade, can that happen? Absolutely. Can a fourth grader feel overwhelmed by fourth grade? Could that happen? Absolutely. So my point is that anybody can feel overwhelmed at any stage. Some people are overwhelmed at the idea of ordering off a menu at a restaurant. If you give them a menu, they feel overwhelmed. And of course, the more overwhelmed, the more stress, the more it can affect your health, your life, your happiness, your love, your relationships. And so that's the insight that I wanted to share today is exactly that, is because so often I see people who might have patterns of overwhelm, where they're feeling overwhelmed And instead of addressing that pattern or making practical, like taking practical action steps to then reduce it or even grow into it and feel like they've got it and feel the sense of empowerment in their life or structure it in a way to set themselves up for success, they're feeling ongoing overwhelm and frustration and stress, which can affect their health, their life, their happiness. And so, of course, shifting out of that and back into empowerment and a feeling like you've got this is good for your health, your life, your happiness, your relationships, just flourishing in general. It's good for your soul, your being. So food for thought, that is the insight that I wanted to share with you on today's quick IQ episode. And as always, I want to ask you to please do take just a quick moment to hit the share button on this episode. Share it with somebody you love, somebody you care about, or somebody you don't even know. Because the more that every single person feels empowered and happy and healthy and loved and loving, the better this world is for all of us. And so please do hit the share button. And by the way, if you are somebody who is wanting a deeper understanding of healing and self-healing and how it works, there is a link in the show notes for a free training. You can check it out. And my biggest hope, of course, is that every single person feels empowered and happy and healthy in their life. And so that is my hope for you. And I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. We'll see you there.